Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Friday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. We're going to be here for the next hour to talk Giants football with you. It is the regular season finale coming up Sunday at 1 o'clock at the Lincoln, Philadelphia, as the Giants take on their arch rivals, the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm Paul Dottino. He's Matt Citak. We're at 201-939-4513, 201-939-4513. And as always, if you're not listening to the program live, catch an archive of the show on the Giants Podcast Network, podcast platforms everywhere, and at giants.com/podcasts. All right, so what we know so far, Matt, is that the Eagles are going to sit most of their starters, or at least as many as they can. As Brian Dable said today, they can't bench all of them. Yeah. There's going to be a few guys that we're going to recognize.
For sure.
Because he was asked, basically, how do you prepare for guys who you don't know when they show up in the lineup on Sunday? And Brian's like, okay, but they're going to have to play some of them. We'll know some of these guys. So that's number one. Number two, as far as the Giants are concerned, there's only three guys right now who Coach talked about this morning, and I'll let you go through it with the folks. Doesn't look very promising.
Yeah, so Coach said that Micah McFadden, Evan Neal, John Michael Schmitz were all not practicing again today. The three of them have not been on the practice field at all this week. In terms of Micah and John Michael, they both missed last week's game.
Yeah.
So it's certainly trending in the direction that they are going to miss Sunday's game as well. And the same goes for Evan Neal. Now, Coach would not fully rule them out with 100% certainty. He said that there is the potential that they could play, but the fact that it is week 18, unable to practice the entire week, certainly seems like they're trending in the direction of not participating in Sunday's game. And then there's also defensive lineman Armon Watts, who Coach didn't mention today, but he mentioned earlier in the week that Armon already underwent surgery on his knee, so it's pretty safe to say that he will not be suiting up on Sunday as well. So those four guys, well, Watts definitely out. The other three most likely out.
Right.
Everyone else seems like has at least a good chance of being, healthy enough to suit up on Sunday.
Well, somebody in the press corps today did actually ask, even if you've got guys who are not on the injured list but are a bit nicked up and gimpy, and I'm sure they were referring to guys like Malik Neighbors, Brian Burns, guys who've been kind of battling some things. Drew Phillips has been battling through, a shoulder. What are you going to do with those guys? And they're practicing today, and Coach said they'll play. In fact, he actually said Neighbors is okay to go.
Yeah, he said Malik is good to go, which is good news. I mean, I, for one, would love to see Malik Neighbors break the franchise record for receptions. I mean, he already has the rookie reception record, and he only needs 4 more catches on Sunday to beat Steve Smith's record from 2009. And that would be a pretty impressive feat to do, considering he's a rookie. He missed 2 games. He's been playing with 4 different quarterbacks. He's been catching passes from 4 different quarterbacks this season. And he's been playing through, a few different ailments for at least half the season. I mean, it seems like since the first month of the season when he's come back after the concussion, he's been dealing with something almost every single week. He's popped up on the injury report. He's fighting through it. I would love to see him break the franchise rookie record, or the franchise reception record on Sunday. And I feel like he has a good chance of doing it, considering he's had 4 receptions in every single game this season, and that's all he needs. And then I wouldn't be surprised if in the near future we're talking about Malik Neighbors breaking his own record again and again and again.
I'll go as far to say that I think Dable's going to try to get it for him in the first half, maybe even the first quarter. I think they pump feed him early.
Yeah, I mean, it helps when he's your best player and, your best chance to win the game is to get the ball into his hands.
That too.
Certainly helps. I mean, we did see it, last year with Sterling Shepard?
Yes.
Where he needed 1 reception to get, to the next spot on the Giants all-time reception list.
And they also tried to force feed a touchdown to him in Dallas.
Yes, but for the reception, they literally did one of those pop passes that barely, I mean, it counts as a reception. It's barely, but it does count. So we've seen, the Giants do that in the past. So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Malik has, sort of force-fed the ball early and often.
Now, when we talk about how sometimes there are twists and turns of the season and you never know how things are going to go, folks, I got to tell you, just as an illustration, and this is not to pile on anybody, but as an illustration as to how things have gone in the wrong direction, the Giants were 2-4 when they played Philly back in October. And I believe Philly at that point was 3-2. And that game at that time was like, okay, this is going to be a tussle in the division. This is a big game for the Giants because if they win this game, they're only one game in the loss column behind Philadelphia. We thought at that moment, I think as I recall, this division could be really tight and a real cluster. And as it turned out, that was the early stages of the Giants' 10-game skid, which took them into a spiral. And at the beginning of Philadelphia just rolling off a chunk of wins.
Yeah, I mean, the first Eagles game, 2 weeks prior to that was when the Giants went to Seattle and upset the Seahawks, with playing in front of the 12s. Like, that was a very impressive win. And then the following week was that Sunday night game against the Bengals, which obviously the Giants lost, but with, just over 2 minutes left in the game, the Giants were down a field goal.
Yeah.
Like, that was a very close game that could have gone either way. So, yeah, going into that Eagles game,
there was a lot of hope for the season still.
There was hope. I feel like, we kind of looked at that Eagles matchup back in, week 7, as this is sort of going to be the first real, litmus test for this Giants team. Unfortunately, it did not go great, and then I guess it sort of foreshadowed what was to come the next 2 months.
I think that was kind of the fork in the road for both teams.
Yeah.
Because Barkley ran for over $170 that day with a couple of touchdowns, and that catapulted them onto, again, like a hot streak, and the Giants just spiraled. And that was really the fork in the road, as I look at it. To me, that was the fork in the road.
Yeah, I mean, for the Eagles, too, you mentioned it. The week before, they barely beat the Cleveland Browns. They won 20-16, and this was coming out of their bye week. And then they played the Giants. The Eagles won 28-3 in that game, and that brought them to 4-2, and they would continue winning games until they were 12-2, until they lost to the Commanders just 2 weeks ago. And then the Commanders game is the only loss that they've had since that bye week. So, yeah, it really kind of was a turning point for both teams.
Now, when you talk about recent history between these teams, and we all know that Tom Coughlin was the last Giants coach to really have any success against Philadelphia. It hasn't been pretty. Since the 2014 season began, the Giants are, including the playoffs, 4-18 against this Eagles franchise. They have lost 11 straight games at the Link. This has been a one-sided rivalry, folks, and one that's just been very ugly. The Giants have lost some horrible games. They've also lost a few barn burners. To suffice it to say, okay, that's a house of horrors for this team. So I understand that there are fans who have their own objectives and their own opinions and their own agendas about what's going to happen this Sunday. But in my mind, when you're talking about an arch rival who has basically had the better of you for a decade and made life for you miserable, like literally suffocating the air out of your lungs, I'm sorry. I don't care if the Eagles are playing practice squad players. If I'm the Giants, I'm going down there and I'm doing everything I can to beat them. The Giants are approaching it that way. The coaches and the players have talked about it. And quite frankly, I don't think there's ever such a thing as a meaningless or worthless win over the Philadelphia Eagles, if you don't mind me saying it that way.
Yeah, look, no, I hear you. And I understand where a chunk of the fan base is coming from in saying that, they just don't see some of the benefits from winning a game like Sunday's game, upcoming game against the Eagles. Now, the players and coaches certainly don't look at it that way. I mean, you ask any single player in this locker room and they are like, we want to win this game. We want to beat our division rival. That a lot of these guys, anyone that's been on this Giants team has not beaten the Eagles. or at least in Philadelphia. There was the one,
not in Philly,
the Week 18 game last year, of course. But this is a team. No one on this team has beaten the Eagles in Philadelphia. That's one of your division rivals. So, to those fans out there that don't want the Giants to win on Sunday, I will just say this: either you will get your wish and the Giants will not win, or the Giants will finally snap this terrible losing streak.
You mean there can't be a tie?
I mean, I guess there could be. We saw one only 2 years ago, but I wouldn't count on it.
Here's what I will say. From a football perspective, I think you and I are on the same page. You want to go down there and win the game. From a fan's perspective, here's the only thing that I say to you as a fan, if you happen to think the other way on this. And that is, if you've ever been to Philadelphia for a Giants-Eagles game, especially, in the last 10 years, you know how miserable that feeling is when you make that drive home up the turnpike. It is not fun in any way, shape, and form. It is just not. They are the most difficult fans in the league to deal with. We know that Bill Parcells and his 80s Giants used to love playing Philadelphia because they beat them a lot of times. And they were winning and getting playoff appearances and Super Bowls. And the Eagles were nothing. It didn't matter if they were good or not. They were never going to get the Lombardi. Well, they finally got one years later, long after Parcells and those guys retired. But the point is, that place is such a house of horrors that as a fan, look, I have never met, and you may have met otherwise, I've never met a Giants fan who made the trip to Philadelphia, sat in that stadium, watched the Giants lose, and enjoyed themselves. I've never met one of those.
No.
Usually, Giants fans go down to Philly, they see the Eagles win, they come back, and they have nothing but terrible things to say about the day.
Yeah,
so
not on top of, just in those situations, seeing the Giants lose. I mean, Philly fans are just the worst.
Well,
I mean,
that's what I'm getting at.
Growing up, my family, I always wanted to go down to Philadelphia for a Giants-Eagles game, and my family refused because they had just heard so many horror stories about Giants fans going down there and just getting berated by the fans.
The fan experience when you lose a game in Philadelphia is really not good. It's just not. So, especially if you're a Giants fan and you are going to the game on Sunday, for your sake, I wish you a safe trip. I wish you an enjoyable game, and we'll talk to you again on Monday. How about that?
Yeah. All I'll say is, again, I understand where some fans are coming from in wanting the Giants to lose, but for me, I will never be upset about beating a Philadelphia team. Because when it comes to Philadelphia sports, doesn't matter the sport. Pick any single one. I hate all Philadelphia sports. I'm not afraid to say that. I hate them, whether it's the Eagles, the Sixers, the Phillies, the Flyers. They're rivals to all of the teams that I root for. Growing up 15 minutes from the stadium, I've grown up just hating Philadelphia sports, just like they hate us, and they hate all of our teams. So I will never apologize or say sorry for saying I want to see the Giants defeat a Philadelphia team.
I can understand that. And there were only two Philadelphia pro athletes that I've ever rooted for. Dr. J, because Julius Erving, let's face it, he's universal.
I consider him a former Net as a Nets
Well,
fan.
that's fine, but you can't root against him.
No.
He's Dr. J. And Mike Schmidt. Even though Phillies fans turned on Schmidt at one point in his career, I was big Mike Schmidt guy.
I can't say I've ever actually actively rooted for a Philly athlete, but there are certainly some over the years that I can say I have a lot of respect for, and then others that I have no respect for and just truly despise. But we don't have to go down that road.
That's okay. 201-939-4513 is our phone number. We've tried to give you a little bit of entertainment and flavor as we have embarked on today's program with one final regular season game to go. I see the lines are now full, so let's hit them up. Dan in the Poconos is first up on the program today. Hello, Dan.
Hey, Paulie and Matt. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Happy New Year to everybody out there, by the way.
Well, let me tell you, I'm glad I got you two guys because I was beside myself last weekend when we won. I mean, I was like, I can't root against my team. I'm in my 60s. I've been rooting for the Giants since the 70s. And, they're my team. And I was like, all right, so we won. And now it's like, but you know what was so great? I saw a clip on after the first touchdown. I think it was Neighbors who got us that first touchdown. And it was a little shot they showed of Dable grabbing Neighbors, and they kind of like hit heads, and they both were smiling. And I was like, you know what? Just to see the smiles on their faces made me feel so good, because they deserve it. They work so hard and all that. But as a fan, I'm like, because and you guys are different, because you two guys are fans. This is your job, yes, but you guys are Giants fans, and I'm like me, and so you're like, and I'm listening to what you're saying today, and I'm like, okay, I'm if we win, we win, and it would be great, because of all the reasons you said. And if we lose, so be it, and it helps us in the future. But it's good to hear it from you guys, because you guys think about the future, like the players and the coaches. I know they want to win. They want to win today, but they're not worried about, a couple of years if we get that franchise quarterback, or if we get whoever, even though he may not be there in the next draft.
Dan, I'm glad you brought this up. I'm going to let you finish in a second, but I'm glad you brought this up. You just mentioned something that I think is very important for people to understand when they listen to our opinion. And anyone who wants to disagree is allowed to. Opinions are fine, as long as they're logical and they have some sensibility about them. We can always agree to disagree. But you just said something. Matt and I work here, right? We're doing this program. We work here. And we have responsibilities, and we come to work, and we're in the building. Now, in all honesty, let's make something very, very clear. It is better for our working environment when the team wins. If it was so bad, if it was so bad for the Giants to win and get a lower draft pick in the pecking order, and it was going to hurt the franchise, why would we be wanting the team to win? Because that would be counterproductive. We work here. It's better for us when the team wins. If it's so detrimental for them to win, then why do we feel that way? That would be dumb. That would be dumb. Okay? But here's the second part to that. And I'm going to let you finish, Dan. The second part to that is this. It's not about the draft slot. It's about who you pick in the slot that determines the fortunes of your team. Okay? How many people were screaming bloody murder a few years ago when the Giants beat Washington in Washington in the Chase Young Bowl? How'd that work out for Washington? They got Chase Young. He got hurt a bunch of times, and now he's off the team playing for San Francisco. Didn't even get a second contract. How did that work out, the Chase Young Bowl? I told people then, I'm not big on Chase Young. I don't know that he's got the full physical tools to be an all-around great player like everybody says he does. And I'm not sure with some of his svelte frame if he's going to be able to take the beating in the league. Well, it turned out he couldn't. And now he's with his second team. The Giants drafted Andrew Thomas. Now, he's gotten hurt. No question. The facts are the facts. He's gotten hurt. Another injury next year, and you got to start wondering about his future, too. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But if you think for 1 second, as the Giants sit here today, they would have rather have had Chase Young than Andrew Thomas, then you're out of your mind. They wound up better off getting Andrew Thomas than Chase Young, because it's about who you pick with the slot, not the slot itself. So people really need to pull back the stress level on the number of the slot. That is not the most important factor moving forward. It's about who you pick.
For sure, 100%. And as we've been saying and who's ever been on the show for the last week, it's always, and the fans, everyone agrees that it's pretty much a crapshoot. You don't know what's going to happen. So let's beat Philly and hope we're not like picking 9. Maybe I want to pick 5, maybe. I don't want to pick 9. So whatever.
Wherever it is, Dan, it is. and it's going to be up to this front office to either maneuver or flat out make the pick and get the guy who's going to have the best future for this team. That's what it's about. It's not about worrying today, oh, what number are we going to get? That's not what it's about.
I hear you.
You deal with the cards you're dealt and you play.
You guys,
That's
man.
what you
They
do.
always keep me grounded.
Thank you, Dan. Be well, my friend.
Thank you, Dan.
201-939-4513. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, this is my third time on the show this week, so I've said this the previous days, but like the draft order is going to be where it's going to be. The Giants are going to land where they're going to land. They're not going to go below the 9th pick. That is for sure. That's for certain. Chances are, even if they win, they won't even drop all the way to 9. It could be 7 or 8, depends. Wherever the Giants end up, as you said, it's about just making the right pick. If the front office believes that one of these top 2 quarterbacks, or who knows, it could be, by the time April comes around, we could be talking about 3 quarterbacks as top 10 picks. Who knows? If the April comes around and that is what the front office believes, that one of these guys is the future, has the potential to be the future franchise quarterback, then I don't care how much it costs. You go up, try to make the trade. I mean, we literally saw it last year. Joe Shane tried to move up for some of the for Drake May or Jaden Daniels. It's just those 2 teams wouldn't do it. And now, the same thing could happen again. 100%. I'm acknowledging that is a possibility. But you just have to let the cards, play out as they will, and then deal with it after. I mean, if there's no cost too high to move up to get your franchise quarterback, if you have conviction that guy is your guy. Now, I also said this earlier in the week that this happens to be a rather weak quarterback class. There are a lot, not everyone, but a lot of top draft analysts out there that are saying that a lot of teams have these top 2 quarterbacks. If you want to combine them with the 2024 draft class, no higher than quarterback 7. So the 6 quarterbacks that went in the first 12 picks, 3 of which the Giants had an opportunity to take at 6. All of those guys, at least by some teams and a lot of draft analysts, are ranked higher than the 2 top quarterbacks this year. So, and I said this the other day, unless you were banging the table saying the Giants should have drafted, or back in April, the Giants should draft Michael Penix, Bo Nix, or J.J. McCarthy, then I don't understand why people are freaking out so much now that the Giants might not get the opportunity to draft Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. There's no guarantee at all that those guys are going to be franchise quarterbacks. Obviously, they could, but the Giants could end up missing out on those 2 guys, drafting one of the top position players, and get a perennial all-pro player. That's just as likely to happen.
I'm going to ask you a very simple question. And fans out there, if you want to chime in on this, you're welcome to. But I'm going to ask Matt a question. 2001, pick number 2, Zach Wilson. Pick number 3, Trey Lance. Picks number 4, 5, 6, and 7 were Kyle Pitts, Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, and Penei Sewell. Do you think today that the teams that were in 4th, 5th, 6th, or 7th feel better about the guy they got than the teams that picked 2nd and 3rd? Simple question, 1-word answer. Yes or no?
Yes, other than Atlanta. I don't know. The Kyle Pitts pick, I feel like they maybe have some regret towards. But Kyle Pitts has had a better NFL career than Zach Wilson or Trey Lance, even though he hasn't quite lived up to expectations. You could go even further down that list. J.C. Horn, just named a Pro Bowler, number 8.
Yeah.
You can keep on going further down and get
I figured
more.
I would just restrict it to like the top 7 or 8 because that's probably where the Giants are going to be.
That's fair.
So anybody out there who right now today wants to scream about being 1, 2, or 3, remind yourself of the 2021 draft. When, I get it. Trevor Lawrence was number 1. Okay, I get it. He might still wind up being a franchise guy. We still don't know the answer to that. He's kind of been mixed so far. But picks 2 and 3, washouts, both quarterbacks.
And it's not even only...
And the next several picks were terrific.
And it's not even only that draft. You can go to the next year. I mean, 2022, Kenny Pickett was the top quarterback drafted, and he went in the 20s.
I picked out this one for a reason, because it fit the narrative of picks 1 to 8 and 2 quarterbacks in the first 3 picks. I think it's very similar. You could wind up with a similar situation in terms of the permutations and the combinations in our draft. That's why I picked this one out.
Fair.
And I think teams 4, 5, 6, 7, and you want to go 8, we'll go 8, are all thrilled that they did not pick 2 or 3 and grab a quarterback.
Yeah, and I mean, there are other examples of draft classes as well where, like, let's say the 2020 draft class.
Sure there are.
Joe Burrow was the first pick. The Bengals had the first pick. They took him. Picks 2 through 4, there were no quarterbacks taken, despite Tua and Justin Herbert being, top, quote-unquote, top prospects. They ended up going 5 and 6. The Giants could end up staying at 4. They could end up falling a couple of picks and also still potentially get the quarterback. Like, I know last year teams traded up to pick quarterbacks 1, 2, 3, but that doesn't happen every single year. It happens sometimes. In the example you just gave, that's another one where quarterbacks did go 1, 2, 3, but that's not guaranteed to happen every single year, especially in a class that's considered a quote-unquote weak quarterback class. Some teams are not going to force that pick. We've already seen reports that Cleveland is more likely to sign a veteran to compete with Deshaun Watson than draft a rookie in the top 3. New England, we already know they have their franchise quarterback already. They're not taking a quarterback. So we don't know what's going to happen yet. So I don't get the level that some people are freaking out about. Like,
well, the exaggeration.
You can root however you want to root, and I fully understand that is everyone's prerogative. If you want to root for a loss, you have the right to do that. But it's just the level of like panic and freaking out I've seen on social media. That is what I don't fully understand.
The emphatic exaggeration is based on a paper thin piece of logic, because there's no certainty or sure thing either way about how this thing lands.
Yeah, we're not talking about like a Joe Burrow level prospect here. Whatever you want to put between Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward, whoever one you want to rank higher. And I'm not saying they either one or both could not. They could end up being great NFL quarterbacks. That is fully in the realm of possibility. But they are so far from a sure thing. It is not even close to some of these high-level quarterback prospects we've seen in recent years coming into the draft.
All right, next phone call is Cliff from New York. Hello, Cliff. You're next on BBKL.
Hey, how you doing, guys? Good to be with you. It's good to hear the show as usual. All the noise out there that you were just talking about, there is an antidote for it, which is to catch this show daily, and if you can't do it live, you can get it in the archive on the website, and it's really very helpful because you hear all this logic, and that's what floats my boat. I got PO'd this morning reading a post from one of the national writers who shall go nameless, and oh man, you and Russ Salzberg and everybody else said there was nothing wrong in the locker room this year. It was total crap, and here it is being floated again. God damn, I just should have known better for opening it. But anyway, here I am, and I'm listening, and I'm hearing all this stuff about my team. I wanted to talk about the progress and how that might be continued this weekend, but I just wanted to add something, Paul, that you said a couple of years ago about going down to Philly, and people were talking about, they were going to go down there and they were going to experience the fans. And you said something that I think bears repeating, which was, for our fans going down there, be smart. Remember that?
Yes, sir. 100%.
Man, because somebody posted a video once which was nice. It was helpful with this, where they showed being in the parking lot and having these guys, these people, getting in their face, and they
Cliff,
were just
it's
smiling.
A rough crowd.
They just kept smiling,
It's a rough crowd, and Philadelphia folks are proud of being a rough crowd. And you know what? That's fine. I don't want to antagonize them. That's not what I meant to do. I simply meant to bring to light that it can be a very, very rocky time if you are a Giants fan in that building. That's just a fact.
Absolutely. Be prepared. Be smart. It's anyway. So it's great to hear about going to Philly. Yeah, we're playing Philly. I'm looking for a repeat as much as I can get of the good stuff that I saw last Sunday against Indianapolis. I mean, as much as I can get. I saw some pretty darn good play from guys that aren't supposed to be first-line players for us, and I saw quarterback play, which was what Dable emphasized in the postgame. When you get good quarterback play, he didn't say elite Hall of Fame quarterback play, you know, a good quarterback play, which meant, in a nutshell, Drew Lock takes one step back, two steps back, he glances to his right, he lets the ball go right away, and Neighbors catches it before, 1 second later, he would have caught the ball in contact. So instead, he catches it and he splits the two guys and he's off and running. And that was what was missing. And as much as I was a supporter of Daniel, he had a problem with having confidence, I think, in the offense that required that kind of pinpoint timing, as long as the offensive line was only as good as it was. Something like that. Anyway, he's not here anymore. So my question is, I think I've seen us develop some serious depth this season by playing all these young guys, and whoever we draft, and as important as the drafting is, the thing that I've been impressed the most about Joe, Shane, and Brian is that because they've been active in drafts before they got here, they have long lists and files of all kinds of guys that have been playing for other teams to greater or lesser distinction, mostly lesser, and they can grab those guys. One of those guys was Drew Lock. And so, yeah, we got to see a lot more from Drew Lock before we get excited, but all of a sudden this free agent rookie Kubas comes out and he got some raves just from his first couple of games. They like a lot about him. They like everything about him. Can he be another who was the fellow that broke his leg?
You were talking about Richie Seubert.
No, after him.
Nick Gates.
The one that Gettleman found as a free agent.
Nick Gates, who's starting at center for the Eagles this week.
Right. I mean, he really looked good for quite a while, and he had a third-day pick playing next to him, Shane Lemieux, which they looked pretty good, but he got hurt. And so I'm really alive for progress there. But on defense, I mean, these people stepped up. They played adequate. If we can show, and there was a unity in the team.
To be honest, they gave up over 30 points and over 400 yards of offense and about 50% on third down conversions. It was not a great defensive effort against Indianapolis. It was good enough to win, and they made a couple of stops when they had to. I would not be too excited about the defensive tape from last week. I think you got to stop right there when you talk about how explosive the offense was, and special teams, obviously, with Smith-Marsette's 100-yard kickoff return for a touchdown. But if you want to just throw a party over that game, don't include the defense in that party. You can't.
I will say it was encouraging to see the defense finally get some takeaways and win, and help the Giants win the turnover battle. That was encouraging to see.
Yeah.
And Belton's takeaway, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Belton's takeaway was telling because just a couple of weeks ago he had an almost pick. Remember that? Mm-hmm. And that seems to be the way it goes with young players. There was an almost pick, and now there's a spectacular athletic pick. And we all knew he had it in him, but he just got beat out by a better safety for playing time this year. So, yeah, absolutely with the defense, but last week. But their offense was not badly rated. Their offense was pretty highly rated. So, but no, absolutely. I'm hanging my hat more on the offense because that was our big point of emphasis this year. And when I called into the post-game, Paul, and I was raving about the quarterback play because Dable did. He mentioned it 3 times in his press. You said, and what about the receivers? And I said, I thought of it later. Don't forget about Wandale. When we had that nice run in 22, their first year, we didn't have Wandale at the beginning of the season, did we? Wasn't he hurt
he missed like a game or two in the beginning of the season, and then about halfway through he tore his ACL.
Right,
and when it was in the 100-yard game against Detroit, and he was just getting up to speed.
What you're thinking about in terms of not being around first half of that year was Isaiah Hodgins, who came to the team midway through after being picked up when he was cut by the Bills. Hodgins was a second half of the year receiver, and Slayton had been in the doghouse during the first half of the year. So both of those guys emerged midway through. But, again, Richie James had 57 catches to lead the Giants' pass catchers that year. That room on the whole was not very productive.
Right, and that's why, as exciting as that season was, and the accomplishment of the coach was to do as much as he did with what he had, and the GM going into the season doing as much improvement as he could with
credit to Daniel
money. Jones,
who really maximized everything he had to get them into the playoffs.
Right, and Jones did not see the offense that Dable wanted to run that year because he couldn't. He didn't have the receivers yet. And this year he finally did, and enough protection from the OL where they could make a judgment. And you pointed that out earlier in the year when I was saying, "Gee, Paul, can't we get to see some development from young offensive linemen from the draft or free agency?" And you said, "Hey, how are they going to figure out if Daniel can do what they want him to do without using these veterans?"
Yep.
And that's going to work going forward. So look, man, I'm optimistic. I would just like to see, just feeling good for whatever aspects of the team can show up like they did last week. I think it means something.
All right, and Cliff, I don't want to rush you too much, but I got other guys on hold, and I know they want to get in.
Thanks for the time, man.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Cliff.
Thank you so much. 201-939-4513. We go to Phil in North Carolina. You're next on the program. Hello.
Hello, guys. Thanks for the show, as usual.
Well, thank you for your interest.
Couple of things. One, I was at, just before I get into my question and stuff, comments, I was at the Atlanta game, and boy, even though we were having a terrible year, there was probably about 25% of the stadium was Giant fans, and I was sitting with a bunch of Giant fans. So, but unfortunately, it was a bad game. So one thing I want to say is before we make my second comment, first comment is really, I always look at some of the decisions we make that backfire or we're not perhaps the best decision at the time, and it's frustrating because I'm going to give you an example, like the kicker situation, which I thought was a super critical path that we took in the wrong direction after the Washington game, because the year before against the Jets, we lost that game because of the kicker, and this game here, when we were playing, now that we know a good Washington team close, we lost that game because of a kicking decision. So I think, I would like us to kind of learn from our mistakes. We apparently, in that case, we didn't learn from our mistakes. But in the future, I want us to be well run and make good decisions.
Phil, let me ask you, since you're claiming you want to learn from it, and I agree, you got to learn from everything that you do, and you try not to repeat the same mistakes. Let me ask you then, turn back the clock. You're Joe Shane and you're Brian Dable, and you're going into that Washington game. You now have the benefit of hindsight. Exactly what would you have done in the 24 hours before that game if Gano, who is as high a quality kicker as there is, tells you that, hey, I'm okay, and then in warm-ups, he hits a 50-yard field goal, doesn't look to be hampered, and says, I can kick. Those are the facts as they unfolded. What would you have done?
Even before that, and I'm not, this is exactly how I thought at the time.
Okay.
When I heard that situation, I thought back to the Jet game. I said, having a kicker is critical, winning and losing games. We had that extra kicker in the practice squad, and I said turned to my son, we should have brought that other kicker back, brought him up from the practice squad.
So you would have elevated McAtamney for that one game.
Yes.
Okay, and that's a fair option.
My son was sitting there. I said, "This is a huge mistake."
Okay,
we just had this situation last year with the Jet game.
But Phil, one thing though. So let's say the Giants did elevate Jude for that game. Graham Gano went through pregame warm-ups, and as Paul just mentioned, looked perfectly healthy, looked perfectly fine. So 90 minutes before kickoff, when inactives are due, Jude would have been ruled as an inactive player regardless of being elevated from the practice squad. Graham Gano got hurt on that, the opening kickoff, chasing the kick returner down the length of the entire field on a play that didn't get called back because of a holding penalty.
Yes.
Somewhat of a fluke play that Graham Gano said it was a hamstring injury that didn't really have anything to do with the injury that he popped up on the injury report the day before. So even if Jude had been elevated, he would have been inactive for the game because during pregame warmups, Graham said, "I feel good. I'm good to go." So it wouldn't have really changed anything.
Well, in Cliff's defense, or Phil's defense, I'm sorry, Phil, in your defense, if you're willing to eat the roster spot, which they would have had to have done, I appreciate what you're saying as well. You believe in Gano at his word, so you're letting him kick, and therefore you're not going to activate the second kicker. What Phil is saying, forget about that option. He's saying, I'm willing to eat the roster spot, and I'm going to activate the second kicker regardless, no matter what Gano says.
Okay.
I'm going to activate is that right, Phil? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Only because we went through a nightmare scenario the year before.
I understand.
If I didn't go through that nightmare scenario the year before, I probably would have went with the option what Matt said, But because we had such, I didn't want to lose to the Jets. That was further aggravated me.
So Phil, I agree with you that was a viable option. To me, that's the only way you can really fairly evaluate the fork in the road. What were the logical, viable options at the time? You're saying eat the roster spot and have two kickers active for the game. That definitely is fair.
Yep.
And in hindsight, it did not work out for the Giants. But I understand your thought, and it's absolutely fair.
And the one thing I will say, Phil, back to your original point, is you said you wanted to see the Giants learn from their mistakes. Well, later in the season, the Giants were faced with basically the same exact situation with their punter, Jamie Gillen. And what did they do? They signed a punter to the practice squad, and they elevated him for game day, and he was the one that did the kicking. So the Giants didn't take that risk again. So just to your point, I feel like that was a situation where you could say that the Giants sort of did learn from the mistake and made the right decision the second time.
Absolutely, and that's fair as well. You have to admit that, Phil. That's absolutely fair.
Oh, yeah, no, that's a very good point, because it leads me just to my second point real quick, is that when we're evaluating everything at the end of the year, hopefully we're projecting how is our present front office and coaching staff, do we project them to be better next year, right? Not what they've done this year, because this has been a bad job this year, but projecting out. Where are they going? Do we think they're going to be a better duo in the future? And I'm willing to say at this point that, I think there is some hope for projection, that improvement in that projection, and so I'm preaching patience here in terms of continuity.
Phil, one of the ways you can kind of help yourself come to a conclusion with this question, what you want to do is say, okay, what do we think the reasonable expectation is for the bulk of this roster to play to the back of their football card? if these guys just play like they're supposed to, most of the team, because you know there's going to be injuries, there always will be, you're not going to have a perfectly clean season. That rarely happens in this league. So you say to yourself, if the bulk of the guys, the core guys, give you what they should give you based on their track record and their talent level, you say, all right, where do you believe that team lands? And quite frankly, I said before this season, I thought this roster was an 8-win team. Could win 9 or 10, but I said 8 and 9, and probably I would say at 8 and 9 you're going to miss out on the playoffs. You're going to have to get lucky to win an extra game or two and sneak in. I still feel that the roster as such, meeting the expected level of play that the core guys should have, I think this is still a 500 level type football team. I believe that. I think a perfect storm has sabotaged them and sent them now to 3, maybe 4 wins. So in my mind, I don't think this team is that far away from getting right back to 8 or 9 wins in 2025. I really don't, which is why I lean toward not blowing it up.
Right. No, I agree. So I wanted to give that example of learning from your mistakes and then also saying I believe they're smart enough to learn from their mistakes.
Yeah.
And projecting it forward. So we should keep that in mind. You know, where do you think that projection's going to be? So that's my major point. So
thank you, Phil.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks,
Be
Phil.
well.
Thank you.
201-939-4513. I think, Matt, I've talked on other programs that I've been on. You know, when you evaluate a draft class, you really don't evaluate the draft class. You evaluate the rookie class. And one thing that the Giants have done effectively these last couple of years, they've added some undrafted rookie free agents. They actually become part of your rookie draft class because, as all front offices will tell you, the undrafted rookie free agents are virtually the 8th round, in quotes, because you scouted those guys, and now you have to fight and compete with other teams who are trying to get their hands on them as your, quote, 8th round draft picks. Well, the Giants have 6 draft choices they're very happy with this year, at least on initial inspection. They've also got 2 undrafted rookie free agents in Kubas and Chapman who have gotten some playing time and had shown flashes. And I think, unless something dramatic happens, I think they'll be in training camp over the summer. I don't see either one of those guys getting let go.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be surprised if Kubas or Chapman or either one are not here at the very least for the start of training camp.
Okay, so that's 8 guys. Yeah. That's 8 guys. Last year, add in Tommy DeVito, who won some games and has proven to be at least the number 3 quarterback in this league. And if the Giants decide they're going to want to have 3 quarterbacks in 2025, he might very well be number 3 again. That's possible.
Yep.
Okay? So there was value in him. So count him as part of that draft class, if you will. And Bryce Ford Wheaton, who was an undrafted rookie free agent last year, blew out his knee, has come back, and you know what? He made Nick McLeod expendable. Bryce Ford Wheaton has been really good on kick coverage and become like one of their lead guys on that special teams unit. So you have to consider those guys as well as part of those rookie classes for the last 2 years. That's one of the reasons why I have confidence that this front office and this personnel department is on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously, looking at the 3 draft classes overall, there have been some misses. I don't think neither one of us are going to sit up here and say that every single pick was a home run, because that is not the case, clearly. I will say that, you know, I've made this point so many times on the show that I don't want to just keep repeating myself, but if you look at the first 2 draft classes, and especially the 2022 draft, overall, the entire NFL draft, every team, they're just, as of right now, towards the end of year 3 of those guys' playing careers, there's not that many guys from that draft where you were like, this guy is a bona fide stud. There just really aren't. I've counted, there's like 9 players that, maybe it's changed now since the new Pro Bowl announcements have been made, so I haven't checked the latest. But before this year's, the first 2 seasons, there were 9 players that made the Pro Bowl in the entire draft class of 260 players.
Wait, I'm going to give you a bigger issue, though. It's not just that draft class, which I think is a little underwhelming, like you said, but the fact is, Joe Schoen and his folks, they came in with only about 3 months to prepare for that draft and didn't have an opportunity to really put their personnel department the way they wanted it to be. So it's kind of unfair to grade them as you would their subsequent 2 drafts because they were doing it on the fly in about 3 months.
Yeah, no, that's fair, but then you can't use the same reasoning for the 2023 draft class then, because by then, the front office brought in the guys that in the front office that they wanted to be there to help scout for the 2023
draft.
Yeah,
but that's why I'm saying they did a better job in 23 and 24 because they had more of their guys in place.
If you look at the 2023 draft again, it's not like all of those picks have been so far home run picks. Now, it's still obviously very early in those guys' careers. I don't think it's fair to count any of those guys out yet because they've only been in the league. They're wrapping up their, second season in the league. But it's clear that of the 3 draft classes, this year's draft class is the best. Has the most promise for the future.
I agree with that.
The most promise to be core pieces of the foundation that helps bring this Giants team back to the level where all of us want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
This draft class clearly has the most potential of reaching that. So look, as we said before, it's not up to us to decide who stays and who goes. No. It is well above our pay grade.
It's well above.
But there are, all I'm saying is I guess there are arguments to be made for both sides. You can't just say that one side is right and the other one is wrong, because that's just not the case. There have been instances of some great picks and then instances of picks that have not turned out as great so far. Again, it is still early, but
yeah. No doubt. I think you can point to some general philosophies about how you weigh certain things. Like Matt said, if you have the scale, there are certainly things that you could say, okay, these are negative, and you can weigh them on the scale, and say these are positive, and you can weigh them on the scale. Now, what comes into play and what's very subjective is, do you throw additional pounds on certain factors, and where do those factors lie? On the negative or the positive side of the scale. Some of my generic factors, after doing this for 42 years, I've got some very core philosophies that I've learned through some great Hall of Fame people in football. And when I look at those things, I tend to weigh them heavier than some of the others. And that's why when I balance my scale out, philosophically speaking, again, it's not my call in this particular situation. I have nothing to do with it. But there are a number of those heavier philosophical points where this team has checked boxes on. And that's as far as I'm going to go. I happen to weigh some things heavier than other people do. And that's really where the debate lies. How heavy do you weigh certain factors? And that's going to be different in a lot of people's minds, and that's why there's only a couple of people upstairs who get to make the call.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And as we've spoken about for weeks now, John and I have spoken, I believe we've said it as well, we're never going to sit up here and push or argue for anyone in this building to lose their jobs. It's never going to happen, because in a sense, these are people we work with. We walk out of this room and see Joe Schoen and Brian Dable in the hallway. So we're never going to sit up here and call for people to lose their jobs. Because
here's what I will say, though. Some of the boxes that these guys check are consistent with philosophies that I've been preaching for years and years and years. I'm not just coming up with these things out of the blue. I've been around for 42 years, folks. I got some very core beliefs about a football team, and so they happen to fit some of those core beliefs. That I'm willing to tell you. I wouldn't tell that to you if they didn't. Okay? I would just say, okay, well, whatever. But they do happen to check some of the very important boxes that I've always come to believe to be true, and I've seen super good not so good, and ugly. I've seen those things. I've seen it all. I kind of know where you gotta put more of the weight, and I'm just saying that some of those things I have seen here. So that's why I'm saying what I'm saying. But by all means, I'm not giving you a decision because that's not my job.
No,
not at all.
Not up to us.
Not at all. 201-939-4513. If somebody else wants to get in, we got just a couple of quick moments to go. Final thoughts on this game from us, if nobody else wants to chime in, is that ultimately you're looking at Malik Neighbors trying to get the record for the receptions for the Giants. Unfortunately, Tyrone Tracy with a bunch of injuries in the second half of the season, also some game flow. He didn't give as many touches. He's not going to get his 1,000 rushing yards. I kind of wish he would have.
He needs 220.
Not going to happen.
Probably not going to happen. You never know, but probably not.
I would love to have seen it happen. But he had a few games in the last 2 months where either the game flow was no good or he was banged up a little bit or Singletary wound up getting some more touches.
Well, not only that, but the first 4 games he barely saw the field.
That's true, too.
If he'd been starting from
going
week
back
1,
all the way to the beginning.
Yeah, if he had started from week 1, he would certainly at least be a lot closer to 1,000. But it obviously took until Devin Singletary got hurt in that Cowboys game for Tyrone Tracy to start week 5 for the first time. It's only been 11 starts. He's got 780 rushing yards. It's not bad for a 5th-round rookie.
No, not at all. I would love to have seen him get the 1,000, but that is not in play. Other than that, I don't think there are any other marks that guys are closing in on. Do you have any reason to believe that?
Not like, big milestone marks. Obviously, Malik and Tracy both getting 1,000 yards was one of the big ones. They've both
already got
accomplished that this past Sunday. One that I'm, it's certainly looking like it's going to happen, and I am impressed about is Brian Burns is going to start his 17th game on Sunday. He is one of only 2 players on the entire roster that has started every single game. Now, for those that have been looking at the Giants injury report every week, and a lot of weeks, it's been a pretty extensive list.
Yes, sir.
Brian Burns has been on that injury report list almost every week for months now. And despite, the Giants falling out of playoff contention, what was it, 6 weeks ago? Something like that. Despite the defense at times struggling, this man has come out every single Sunday battling through injuries and giving it his 100% every single snap that he is out there. He's at 8 sacks. He needs 2 to get to 10 double digits for just the second time in his career. 2 in one game, that might be a little tough for him to reach. It's doable, but it certainly would take a standout performance to reach that. But even if he doesn't get it, I have been left just thoroughly impressed with that man's work ethic, what he brings both on and off the field. I mean, the Giants coaches have spoken about his leadership, stepping up as a leader off of the field, something that he wasn't necessarily known for his time in Carolina, but has really stepped up as a leader, especially when some of the Giants' other leaders from the last couple of years have fallen to injuries. I mean, the Giants have been playing without Dexter Lawrence for almost 2 months now. Bobby Okereke's been out for a month. Those are the 2
Thibodeau
anchors.
missed over a month with a broken wrist.
Kayvon missed over a month. Those are 3 key components of the Giants' defense, and Brian Burns has really stepped up in a leadership role to fill the shoes of those guys who've been out with injury, but he's also been producing on the field. I mean, according to Next Gen Stats, he ranks, I think it's 7th in the NFL in pressures. And that, again, despite dealing with injuries all season, despite playing 5 games without his fellow starting outside linebacker, playing, 6-7 games without Dexter Lawrence, the Pro Bowl defensive lineman next to him.
I'll go better than that. He's tied for 3rd in the league in tackles for loss.
There you go.
Tied for
also
3rd.
Making an impact in the run game. Exactly.
He's not just a pass rusher.
No. So considering that he was the Giants' obviously big offseason acquisition this past year, I just wanted to tip my cap to him because
I totally concur.
I could not be happier about that acquisition. I think he has lived up to expectations. Obviously, in an ideal world, you'd love that sack number to be higher. Obviously, you would love him to be leading the league in sacks. I'd say that about any Giants defender, though. But considering the circumstances around him, he has just left me so impressed with the way he's carried himself all season.
He's a big part of this franchise's future. Career high, 66 tackles so far for Burns this year. Ties a career high with the 17 tackles for a loss. 16 quarterback hits. Well, twice in his career he's had 20 or more. So we'll see if he can get a bunch on Sunday against Philly.
Also has 8 passes defensed, which is double the highest amount he's had in any previous season.
Correct.
So he's also getting his hands up at the line of scrimmage and knocking down passes, which is good to see.
I'm happy to say he was the first alternate. He was the 4th outside linebacker on the NFC Pro Bowl voting, which means if one of the 3 was Van Ginkel, Grenard,
2 Vikings,
and Verse.
Yeah.
Those are the 3 who made it. I could argue against Verse. I'll go for Grenard and Van Ginkel. Verse's numbers do not come anywhere near Burns's, but he's playing for a team that's going to the playoffs. So I get that. But if any one of those 3 should drop, you'll see Brian Burns go to his 3rd Pro Bowl, and that would be very well deserved. I think the Giants absolutely are getting what they paid for in him. They paid a high price, draft picks and an extension, but I don't think anyone is complaining in this building about the value he brings to this team and what he will in the future. Folks, that does it for this edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. We will be back on Monday, as we are every weekday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, for a live 1-hour talk of New York Giants football. On Sunday, 1 o'clock game, season finale in Philadelphia. At 11 o'clock down at Tommy's Tavern in Clifton on Route 3.
Yep.
You'll have the opportunity to visit Jonathan Casillas and John Schmelk and Phil Simms, very special guest, Phil Simms at Tommy's Tavern for the 2-hour pregame show from 11 a.m. till 1 p.m. on Sunday afternoon. Then there's the ball game. It's on CBS this week.
Yep.
It's not a Fox game. It's a CBS game.
Tiki's on the broadcast.
Indeed he is, with Andrew Catalan and Jesse McCourty, right?
Yep.
And so after the game, you get the 1-hour post-game on MSG. I know some systems apparently lost MSG this week.
But
you could go Giants.com,
also up
right?
on Giants.com. We stream the post-game show after every game.
Yeah, so if you don't have MSG anymore because your cable company has had an impasse with the contract relating to the cable company and the cable network, go to Giants.com and you can watch the 1-hour live post-game show, and then, of course, the Giants radio post-game on WFAN. Same channel as the pregame. That'll be 2 hours after the game is over. That's it for the week. For Matt Citak, I'm Paul Dottino. You've been listening to Big Blue Kickoff Live, and we'll see you next time, everybody.